All right. Well, praise the Lord, everybody. Good evening. Hope you're all having a great evening tonight. I want to welcome you to our live stream tonight where we'll be going to be talking about what it means to be a man of influence. Just to introduce myself, my name is Deacon Brandon Halliburton. I am the president of the Original Glorious Church Brotherhood in Columbus, Ohio, at the Original Glorious Church, where our pastor is Dr. Benito Wright. And we want to welcome you, and we are really excited to have this conversation today. We have a very capable guest with us. I use that term loosely. Bishop Wilson is a great man of God who I've had an opportunity of being a part of some of his, actually a program that he had a few years back, but I've also had the opportunity to observe him from afar, as well as experience the ministry that God has given him. And so without further ado, I want to introduce to you all to Bishop Joseph Wilson. Bishop Wilson, how are you doing tonight? Thank you for joining us.
I am outstanding there, Deacon Halliburton, and grateful to get this opportunity to be in this space with you.
Awesome, awesome. So let's jump right in. I want to do some quick introductions, if you could. I just want to. I know you, and but there may be people who are watching live and even the recording and replay of this, and so I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, where you're from, and some of the passions you have in life. So I'm gonna hand it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Maybe the facetious side of me wants to come out first. I don't know whether to let him or not, because I could sum up the whole introduction in a few words. I went from a mess to a message to a ministry, and there goes life. But it has been my journey and learning how to fail forward and how to take those failures and craft a future that God had for me. I've had the privilege of working on both sides of the fence in the faith sector as well as the business sector for quite some time now. Have the titles, credentials, things like that. As my grandmother asked me some years ago, how do you feel about titles? Even at that young age, when I was maybe in my mid to late 20s, and when she asked me that, at that point, I'd always been called something. So I told her, Granny, it doesn't move me one way or another because I've always been called something, some good, some bad. So kind of flow with it.
Mhm.
I'm grateful to be a bishop in the Lord's church and to serve at that level. But more importantly, I'm more excited about serving out the wiring or the God DNA that He put within me to make a difference in the lives of people, which I have been on this quest and journey since I was a 5-year-old, learning to dream and then step into the space no matter what's going on in life to fulfill those dreams as a difference maker. And literally live that life and that perspective of trying to be a difference maker, which is, why it's so critical in this space that we have this conversation about being a man of influence, because it doesn't come from our titles or our degrees. They have their place and their respective relevance, but that's not where influence comes from. So it's an exciting time to really bring our audience into influence in general, but also at the same time set the stage for leadership development that's on a collision course between now and 2030. In business, they call it the silver tsunami is going to hit,
Mhm.
and that means that there's going to be such a massive exodus from the workspace across all sectors of boomers retiring that it's going to leave a gaping hole, and especially at the top of organizations. And on the church side, it's called a succession tsunami.
Mhm.
And the same phenomenon that the average age of those that are in ministry leadership today says that we're in a ticking time clock, that it's only a matter of time that there's going to be major transition. So we have an opportunity to start now and launch something that would prepare people to not only emerge into leadership through influence, but also create an influence culture beyond titles and positions,
Mhm.
which is essential to younger generations being engaged in the process.
Awesome. Awesome. Well said. Well said. And before we get into this interview a little bit more, I want to encourage those who are watching online on Facebook and YouTube, as well as on Twitter. If you can, just be sure to hit the like on this video. Also, if you can, we will have a portion of this interview where we'll be going to the comments to see if there's any questions towards the end of this interview. So if you could, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the comments, and please share this. We do want to get this in front of as many people as we can. You know, this stream is definitely, I believe, the principles and what we're going to talk about here is going to cover both men and women. But more so, we want to really dive into being a man of influence and what that means. And so, with that being said, let's jump right into the conversation. So we understand, we talk about influence, and that word itself is used, in my opinion, quite loosely here in the 21st century. You know, we're in 2024, and social media is in a whole different realm than what it was years ago. And now we're hearing things like social media influencer, and you know, the term influencer is being used, where people are willing to invest money into the influence that people have to tap into their spheres of influence or the people that follow them. And so if we could, let's start at a really basic level, and really let's define influence. So if you could just take some time and really tell us, what does the word influence, you know, mean to you? And this, the other half of that question would be, how does that impact, or how does influence impact your daily life or our daily lives?
Okay, excellent, excellent question. And I like the definition that may be in a formal way, but it's really impacting from Cambridge Dictionary, and it says the power to affect how someone thinks or behaves, or how something develops,
Mm,
which gives life to influence, to do something, not just something to have. Because we're in an era, everybody wants to be called something. People don't no longer fear death; they fear living and dying without significance.
mm, yeah.
So influence in that mindset is very powerful to look at it, and how it affects the way somebody thinks and behaves, which gives you a way to build content. And John Maxwell says something very powerful in his definition of leadership. He says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. You kind of work that definition with his perspective and teaching on leadership, which we'll get into a little bit later. The ability to affect how somebody thinks or behaves, or how something develops, says that we are moving away from command and control leadership style of 20th century to influencing how someone thinks and behaves, or how something or someone develop, which means it's a whole different approach. Whether you have a title or you don't have a title, you can step into influence and make a difference. And I think that's key right now, when you have to set a culture or an environment where anybody can step into leadership or have the opportunity to emerge, but you got to have a common place of
Mhm.
emergence. And influence to me is that place of common emergence for people of all generations and all levels.
Awesome, awesome. Well said, well said. And I actually equated influence and leadership as somewhat as the same thing, in my opinion. I felt like they will go hand in hand in some cases. And I know you're familiar with Miles Monroe. He has something where
Yeah.
he talks about. He says leaders, essentially, people misunderstand what leaders are. You can essentially lead from any position or role that you have, in the context of, maybe, you know, you could be a son in a family of five. You can lead from your perspective. You could be a janitor or work in a fast food restaurant, but you can lead from that perspective. And that's why I was thinking like maybe influence and leadership, being a leader, go together in some capacity. So I'm glad you said that.
And I
Let's.
think your perspective is spot on. When I look at the dynamics of David's 30
Mm,
mighty men,
oh
he
yeah.
had three mightiest that had tremendous influence on David as the leader, as well
Mm,
as the whole environment, but they never ascended to a leadership role
mm,
in those 30 men. But you see throughout that whole interchange in First Chronicles that others got promoted because of what they did to formal leadership roles, but the three mightiest stood above them but never got a title or position.
mm. So that let's take that a step further because I love David. David's probably he's one of my favorite characters because I just glean from his experiences in scripture, and I feel like he's one of the ones that I would go to. You see his stories, and he has. Last I read, I don't know how many chapters God had dedicated to this one man, but it tells just his character and the type of person he was. But going back to influence, let's talk about what are some qualities of influence that you would say somebody would need to have to be influential in their community, in their home, or their workplace? What are some of those qualities that specifically, let's talk about men. What are some qualities that a man should have that make him influential in his sphere? Like, so it could be home, church, work, the marketplace, wherever.
Very, very interesting question because it needs to be where almost anything we do in today's environment that it can transcend one area and
Mm-hmm.
not be limited to one focus. And that's why, as an executive program leader with the Maxwell certified leadership certified team, that it gives me tools to look into leadership and influence as they correlate together in a more powerful and detailed way. And one particular teaching, and based upon one of John Maxwell's books, is Becoming a Person of Influence, which takes 10 principles of influence but missionalize them in what you're not just learning details or principles, you're really learning it from the four M's within that piece, that body of work, which is to take those 10 principles and learn how to model, motivate, mentor, and multiply influence, which is a powerful way to not learn to learn, because we're with 24/7 platforms to gain information. We're kind of inundated with content and information and overload, but to make them functional is even more powerful, because then it can lead to something that we are and what we do. So when I look at that and boil it down to what I've been teaching as the life skills of leadership, and that's taking four of those key principles and boiling them down to, if you miss all of the others, more times than not across all industry and sectors, you need to have the ability to listen.
Mm,
You need to have integrity with people, because integrity builds trust.
mm,
If people can't trust you, you lose your influence.
yeah.
You have to have faith in people. That builds a sphere of influence and a level of influence with people. And the third one is you have to have the capacity and ability to enlarge people. That those four together become life skills, that whether you are in a formal role or in a titled position, that you need those skills, those life skills. And it does not matter whether you're male or female, young or old, because I'm hoping we have a little bit time during the retreat on Saturday to actually do some functional and hands-on learning in terms of listening.
Yeah. All
I
right.
had to go to a foreign country to figure out that I didn't listen as well as I thought. But over the week of being in a country transformation trip to the Dominican Republic with the Maxwell Leadership Foundation and going through learning the skill of listening, I improved having information that gives me the ability to change and grow. And leadership and more importantly, influence is not the same with everybody, and it doesn't have to remain on the same level. It's not stagnant, but it grows. Because another excellent book by John Maxwell is The Five Levels of Leadership, or has been talked about the five levels of influence that really can take you places, but you got to become others focused.
Mhm.
Influence is more about other people than about the person that calls themselves a leader.
Awesome. Well said. Well said. So I appreciate that, and those are all great in general. All what you would call life skills. I think they're all uh, needed in the life of anybody. And what? How do you feel about communication as part of a life skill? You know, we talk about listening, but there may be some men who don't know how to communicate. How do you feel communication falls into influence and being a man of influence?
It is high on the list all across any kind of assessment in this space that we're in now, in this multimedia duality of in person and within media space that we're in right now. It is a great means of impacting people, whether it's for, as you pointed out, listening is a part of communication.
Hmm.
But it's one of the great, is deemed as one of the greatest fears of all people is talking in front of somebody.
Yeah.
But all communication doesn't happen in front of an audience. Most of it happens one on one. And to be able to engage an audience, I can remember some years ago as a national sales manager and training inside sales representatives and the art of selling was to get them a fluid communication style that helped them to engage people rather than talk at people.
Mhm.
And those three steps, I used it also in my second book, Preaching Pews, and how to teach people how to evangelize, interestingly enough. And those three things is one is inquire, inform, and invite, which becomes a toolkit. Before we make assumptions about who we're communicating with, if we ask a few key questions to gain some information and in that inquiry phase, then it helps us to know who we're communicating with, which can lower the fear and increase the engagement. Because I'm no longer talking to a stranger. And even when you think you know a person, you ask a few questions about a few things and you get a whole different perspective of them. So,
Mhm.
so the ability to ask questions in communication make it flow different, whether it's in a business sales context, whether it's sharing your faith from a ministry context, and even in this space, giving people the ability to ask a question increases the ability to communicate effectively. And then when you get to that inform part, you're not just shooting in the dark in terms of what they need to know. You're very on point and very meaningful about what you're sharing in the informational part of the conversation, especially if the goal is to really dive into that definition of the intentionality of influencing the thinking and behavior of another person. You need to have the right information to do that. And then ultimately, in that 3I process is ask the person to take action on it because we get a lot of information that we don't ever do anything with.
Yeah.
I was doing a leadership talk a couple of days ago, and I made the point that I've gone to so many conferences and got so many handouts and outlines that if the fire department came into my house, they'd have to shut me down as a fire hazard because of the volume of paper
Yeah.
that I haven't looked at in decades.
Hmm. Yeah.
So communication is huge, but again, it is teachable in terms of how to do it effectively. And it's changing. You and I doing this interview is a major shift. And how do you effectively communicate around content and subject matter?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So going back to, so we laid the foundation of what influence is. So we have a definition there. We have some areas or qualities of influence that you touched on. So now I recognize, and I'm speaking as a man, but maybe there's others on the line or viewing us now who, okay, I realize that I need to improve in one of these areas. So I understand now what the qualities are. So what are some of the steps that I can take, let's say as a man, to actively work or grow in those qualities of influence and, and enhancing those. So what are some steps or some things that people can do to work on, say, trust or integrity, listening, communication? So what are some steps that we could take to begin actively working on those? And it's not just information, but now how do we put it into action?
Now one of the biggest things that maybe initially will not sound like it's relevant to the question. One of the first things that we have to do is overcome the barrier of valuing ourselves. Because
Okay.
sometimes if I don't value me, I'm not going to seek the information or the opportunity to learn or grow because I don't value me enough to
Mhm.
invest, because everything of value that we think we can get a return on, we invest in. We understand that from a financial standpoint, but from a personal standpoint, it starts with when I value me, then it is the starting block that helped me to get over some of the other barriers like the fear of
Yeah.
communication. If I'm afraid of communicating, then it becomes a barrier and makes me again not seek it or put up resistance. There's a powerful statement that says, if you really want to, you'll find a way.
Yeah.
If you don't, you'll find an excuse. And as a
Absolutely.
leader on all across sectors, I've gotten excuses that they felt were legitimate based on the context in which we connected. They found the thing that I could not refute. So that's the excuse they gave me for not stepping forward and growing and learning. And of course, with me, it doesn't fly. So, so, so if I first value myself, be willing to invest in me, it helps me to deal with the fears that everybody has when it comes to stepping forward into any of those areas. Listening is as one exercise that we go through in the Change Your World process with the Maxwell Leadership Foundation. It is a listening process that helps you to gain the information, but to evaluate yourself. So, having the information to evaluate yourself is a way of improving your listening. And once you evaluate yourself, then you can start to put it in the context of do I have any models around me that are good listeners that I now can draw from? Because then I can pay attention to what they do well and what they don't do well. My spiritual father is a great listener to the point that he often uh, allowed me to talk myself into my own solution because he was hearing me. But every time he was hearing me, he realized that I had the solution. I just couldn't see it.
Mm.
So he actively listened and periodically asked me questions to pull at what I couldn't see so it becomes in plain sight. Integrity is one of those areas that you got to make a conscious choice. that you're going to be who you say you are. You're going to do what you say you're going to do.
Mhm.
I learned as a teenager. I would that growing up without a father, I had a person that embraced me, and to get the encouragement that I got from them, I had to run 5 miles to their house to get that
Mm.
encouragement sometimes.
Okay.
And I willfully did it because I needed what they delivered, and therefore I paid the price and did what it took. And one day he asked me, "How did you get here?" I told him I ran. And he looked at me kind of strange and wondered whether he wanted to believe that or not. So he offered me a ride home afterwards. And I said, "No, that's okay." He said, "How you going to get home then?" And the same way I got here. And later, after he had died, his widow told me that he really bought into me after that day and would do anything to help me
Wow.
because he followed me to see if I was who I said I was.
Wow.
And he found me running back home, the same 5.1 miles that I ran to get there.
Wow.
And that's what this world needs from people in general, to be able to trust that you are who said you are, that you're going to do what you said you're going to do, whether you are a follower serving a role in a nonprofit volunteer role, or whether you're an employee for a company, or whether you're a leader. We have a deficit of integral leadership, of people being different in public and being different in private. So it is huge, but that is a conscious choice. You can learn about integrity, but it's more of a choice to be integral than it is just learning about it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And hopefully that's getting at the question that you asked.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is. And you were talking a little bit about one of the areas that I wanted to touch on was around mentorship. And you touched on it a little bit regarding somebody that you considered a mentor. So, from your perspective and just reflecting on mentorship, how do you think having a mentor or role model can influence a man's, personal growth and development from your perspective?
I look at it from a couple of ways. In my newly released book, The Power of a Cooperative System, I deal with the equation of leadership and helps equal explosive growth. That's from an organizational standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint. The law of significance says one is too small a number to achieve greatness. So we can never get to the full greatness that's intended for us by ourselves. And mentors are those that know the way, go the way, and show the way. It's somebody that's ahead of you in an area that you need to grow in, and therefore they come alongside to give you the perspective or the information or insights or a sounding board, become a thinking partner on some cases, to give you a view into a world that maybe you have not grown to that point yet.
Hmm.
So mentors become almost essential to fully growing and maturing into what you're going to be and become. I hit the best of all worlds as an organizational leader, because I grew with my spiritual father from the local church pastor to serving him as a finance director at the district level. I served as an executive assistant at diocese bishop level. I was a deputy region coordinator, and then ultimately serving on the international cabinet of our organization with him. And he is a regional apostle, but I got to grow with him from level to level, which means I got mentorship and insights beyond where I was, even in my own position and title. One season, I served two regional apostles as an international evangelism director, which allowed me to sit on the international cabinet of our organization and to help shape and make decisions about how we grow as an organization. But that came from growing from level to level with a mentor. I had somebody modeling things, but that journey really started when I started in business in my first leadership roles and management roles in business. Not having the influence of a father or a grandfather up to
Mhm.
that point, but had influence and the ability to step into leadership roles. I needed information not just from books. In my transition from the military to civilian life, I was very militaristic in my approach, and I had that command and control, give orders style. And I used Ken Blanchard's 1 minute managers training system
Mhm.
as a form of mentoring. Mentoring is not just with a person, but it could be mentored through somebody's books or writing.
Yeah.
And I use that as a way of transitioning from one environment to another environment of leadership. And then I saw through the modeling. My spiritual father was a great modeler, Apostle James May. He was a great model, was not very talkative, but me wanting to learn, I could glean things from his behavior that was teaching and telling that shaped who I was as a leader. As a matter of fact, I'm in the process of writing the book Leadership Lessons from an Apostolic Father, based upon that eightfold path that I learned from him, but mostly from his behavior.
Mhm. Now, let's talk a little bit more about. I had a question, man, and it escaped me. It was a good one too. It was a really good question. It was around mentorship. So, say you're a young man, or well, let's take that out the door. You're a man now, and you don't have that father figure in your life. You don't have some man, like you said, that's ahead of you, that's actually gone through some things. How would I find a mentor as a young man to help me develop? Like, what are some things that I could do to find a mentor if I don't actively have one, and I don't may not have somebody that's fatherly in my life, or I might have an uncle or a cousin or something, but they're not in the life that I would want to live. So how would I find a mentor or somebody to mentor me?
That is a very appropriate question, because it's probably the question of most of us.
Mhm.
Uh, Not all mentors are appropriate for me.
Right.
So it starts with the individual has to have a level of self awareness in terms of who they are, and then have a sense of what is it that I'm actually trying to be or do.
Okay.
Because if you don't have those pieces, it makes deciding on a mentor a little bit difficult.
Okay.
Because if you don't have a sense of what you want from the mentor based on who you are and what you want to grow into or become, then any old mentor would do, and it may work or it may not work.
Okay.
And because I needed to grow as a young leader, I looked for a developed leader that was effective, and learned behaviors more than just direct information. How do you behave as a leader? That helped me to go on the road as a national sales manager, as well as an international evangelism director, and be an integral person. Because when you're outside of the watchful eye, you have to have developed integrity, because there's nobody policing you. So I learned from an integral man how to have integrity, whether you're in the view of people or out of the view of people. And I learned very young that there are a lot of temptations out there. There
Oh
are a
yeah.
lot of things that you could get into if you don't have that good foundation. And having the information to draw from is key. So the person that needs to get a good understanding of themselves, what I use is survey tools that helps you become self aware, that gives you a self perception, helps you understand your motivations, that helps you understand the manifestations in your life that you can now sit down with a mentor and begin to explore. If you don't know what they mean, but you're aware of them, let me give you a case in point. I've grown into being a self aware leader because I understand how I'm wired naturally. I'm a very driven, uh, outgoing person, very decisive and domineering as a personality. And then on the spiritual side, when I look at my spiritual gifting, that my dominant spiritual gift is leadership. So I know I need to grow as a leader, and I need to learn how to balance being driven in ways that it allows room for other people. Because driven people sometimes only see the tunnel vision of the mission, the goal, and they're driving for the finish line, and they don't always see the people that are involved or need to be involved. So I would look for a mentor that's different than me, that may be a little bit more settled, a little bit more reserved, that has the ability to see people, consider the needs of people, and then start to learn how are they recognizing and seeing the needs of people, because I really want to help. Powered Become Ministries mantra is we are help that grows with you. And I really want to do that. But sometimes in my natural drivenness, I don't always see things the way I need to see it in terms of the needs of people. So I need mentors that are good on the people side, because I'm stronger on the task or mission side. So I need help with the people side. So that would help me to flesh out who are the mentors in my environment that are either like me but have a strong people side to them. And one of those of late over the last decade or so have been John Maxwell, because it's somebody that I identify with, that I'm very much alike. I think alike, I behave in certain ways that he behaves, so I can identify with him. And in identifying with him, then I can learn the things that he is that I'm not,
Mhm.
because I want to grow into those things, and he's ahead of me in those areas. So he makes, in that sense, a good mentor fit for me.
Awesome.
But it helps me. I already know who I am and who I'm not, and what I'm trying to grow into. So now I come to the table that I can ask the right questions, ask for the right help, and be open to the right information when it comes, whether it comes from a book, a podcast, uh, some kind of other media information, or for the person up close and one on one. All of those are viable mentorship opportunities. I get mentored when I'm walking. I love to walk for exercise, but because I value growth, another one of those self awareness things, one of my core values is growth. I can't walk improving my health without growing.
Hmm.
So I got on my audibles in my ear, and sometimes I need to know some stuff that I know John knows. He wrote about it, but I need to hear him say it. The audio learner in me, another self-aware piece, that I'm a strong audio learner. I need to hear him say it to me, because I've been talking to people for 41 years, but I still need somebody to talk to me. So I'm getting, it's almost like a older brother or an uncle mentoring and telling me all about this stuff that I need to know about while I'm walking.
Yeah.
And it turns into a mentorship session while I'm improving my health, but honoring who I am and the need to grow. So I combine all of that into a mentorship session. I hope that's getting at
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So I had a thought here, and I want to see if we can. I want to see how you answer this question. So you talked about the man that mentored you. You talked about him a little bit. Is it possible for a mentor to be younger than you? Is that possible?
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely. And that is probably the most powerful question of our times because they now have language and a designation to that kind of mentorship. And they call it reverse mentoring,
Hmm.
that the person is older than you, but they're more advanced and further ahead of you in a certain area that you need to grow.
Okay.
But one of the biggest challenges to reverse mentoring when the person is younger, it's what Ken Blanchard called uh, got to get your ego out of the way.
Okay.
And he coined ego as edging God out. And when your ego is so strong, you'll edge God and other resources that God will put in your path out of the picture because it's not supposed to go that way. And I've had older leaders actually articulate that. Mentorship doesn't go that way. I tell you, you don't tell me. But me, I'm learning. I have some younger people in my congregation that I've been experiencing some reverse mentoring before. I've even had a younger person do a leadership assessment on me. She said, sometimes you get frustrated with us because you so know where you're going and you take off running and you're driven to get there and you get there ahead of us. And then you turn around and wonder what's wrong with these folks. And all I could do was laugh, Deacon Halliburton, because I knew they were spot on. But it helped me to learn that leadership, if you don't have anybody following you, is just taking a walk. It
Yeah.
eliminates some of that frustration that we can experience in leadership if we learn to open up to reverse mentoring, because there are a lot of powerful, astute, and well informed and seasoned in certain areas young people
Yeah.
that we can glean and grow and learn from and allow them to mentor in those areas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that should be encouragement for some of the young people that may be watching this, is that I think in the Bible it's talking about Timothy. He's like, don't be intimidated. He didn't want people to be intimidated by his age, and I think a lot of young people out there um, are intimidated because they have this information, and you've heard this term imposter syndrome. We
Yes,
want to uh, we were afraid what people may think about us, and they're not sure about themselves. And even myself, I'm gonna be careful about this. If I was years ago, they probably would have called myself old, but I'm not that old. But I've been in positions where I had to mentor or educate or train people who were older than me, and but they weren't qualified compared to what I was capable of doing, and I could have taken that position, but I had to humble myself to really train somebody and I guess in a way mentor somebody in that role. And sometimes it does take patience, and I would say there's pride even on the mentor side as well, if I could say so, because there are times where I have to humble myself because I don't know everything, or I have to humble myself, or God has a way of humbling us and putting us in a place where we just have to sit down and just endure certain things because he's trying to work something in us. And so, yeah, I appreciate you touching on that, because I felt like that maybe brings some encouragement to some young people out there.
yes, yes. And even in that same context, people have different opportunities to grow and it catapults their growth in certain areas. And I'm one of those. I grew very fast, very young. I was the young guy in ministerial alliance rooms where the average age was either my father, or my grandfather's age. And because of the way that I walked with and served my spiritual father, it allowed me to grow in some key areas very young. And they would put me up in that space. So I got to speak and to do teaching and training to generations ahead of me, which set the stage for now to being able to coach across generations, to reach back and to reach forward, in a coaching context, to help people to grow across generation and fulfill this season of ministry. Is more about what you become than what I become. But it was the affordability of growing with somebody that I got proficient young, so therefore I could serve at a different level young.
Awesome. So I know we do have some people that are online, and I just wanted to just have a side note here. So if you're viewing this live right now, or even in the recording or the replay of this at this time, if you want, just put some questions out there, and we'll you know periodically look at the chat here to see if there's any questions for Bishop Wilson. Just want to encourage you to just put your comments or your questions in the chat here. Also, if you can share it, we don't know who needs this information. I feel like I'm learning as we're having this conversation, and so we just wanted to put that out there real quick. So still in the vein of mentorship, and I think it's along the lines of self-awareness. You talked about self-awareness, and um, in some cases, especially in my life, it has been a challenge to know what who I am as far as what I'm capable of doing, and I had to be thrown into uh, fires, if you will, to really find out what I'm capable of. And one of the characteristics that I learned that God put in me is it has to do with perseverance, because there were times where people would question my ability to do something, but if I stuck with it, I always ended up proving them wrong in some capacity. But I didn't have that self-awareness of what I was capable of or what was inside of me, but I had to go through things to figure that out. Um, to I don't I think fires are good to a certain extent, but I never wish them on anybody. But uh, but you talked about assessments and tools to really help at a self pace of understanding. Maybe there's some tools out there that somebody could invest in, or maybe there's a book or study guides or something. Is there anything out there you would recommend
Yeah.
for somebody to do that
Actually,
self assessment?
from a faith based as well as a non faith based perspective, I do those kinds of assessments or surveys. That one is everybody in the faith arena needs to know their God DNA,
Mm-hmm.
how you're wired naturally and spiritually, because everything springs from that. So those tools, you can reach out to me. We can talk this weekend. If you're
Okay.
part of the retreat, I will make sure that those tools are available, and samples and models of those tools are available, because everybody needs to know that God DNA, because you need to go grow consistent with who God said you are.
Yeah.
And God gives us the raw material, but we grow into that over a lifetime. But we need to know how we're growing into. For instance, when Paul was converted on the road to Damascus, he had a personality or a natural wiring, but then God, through the power of the Holy Spirit, gave him a whole nother ability set through spiritual gifting that connected with his natural wiring, that projected him to be the apostle to the Gentiles, but he still had to grow into it.
Mm-hmm.
He had the natural and spiritual constructs of it, but still had to grow into it. But he had a sense of what he was growing into. And tools help you to understand and look down the road what you're growing into. So, a lot of times, especially in generations past, we were just simply told, go to college.
Mm-hmm.
You go to college and you major in zoology, but you're not interested in animals at all. But you can study that, get a degree, and you got the paper. You spent the years, you spent the money, and you got the paper. So
Yeah.
what does it really mean if I'm not interested in zoology? Those things can help you even understand what to study, because there's a statistical model that says uh, 20% of our growth comes from formal training, in academics. Doesn't have to be a degree program. It could be some other kind of formal training. 20% comes from there. 30% comes from other people in the environment that know about it. And then 50%, as you talked about, you got to jump in OJT and learn as you go. As in the Maxwell culture, we've been taught to jump and build your wings on the way down.
Oh yeah.
Because when you're looking at disaster, you're going to figure out real quick.
I heard somebody they use this at my job. I heard this before. We build the plane while we're flying it. I never, I didn't like it.
Absolutely. Because think about this. These words are very powerful. Imperfect action is better than perfect inaction.
Mm,
Or stated another way, postponed perfection is better than imperfect, or postponed perfection is better, or I can't get it right, but somehow but the words get a little bit crossed up for me. But you get the gist of it. In order to get to some places and to learn some things and grow in some areas, you got to get into the game. You don't learn to speak by not speaking and just studying about speaking. You don't learn to do computer programming by just taking computer program classes.
yeah.
I learned from doing some programming at a night shift computer operator. The system would go down. I was working 15 to 18 hours a day, and there was no such thing as when my shift was up, I go home. No, I went home when I finished the run. I did order processing, and if the shift ended an hour before the next run started, then I had an hour before the next shift. So I had to learn in the middle of the night how to do some programming to bring it back online where it went down, to bring it back to where it can continue the process. And then later I studied computer programming to understand all of the different loops and everything else that you build in a program behind the scene that makes it work. But I had to jump in to learn how to do it, to solve a problem. And that's most of how we learn, is jumping in and doing it. But if we wait for everything to be perfect, then we won't take the proper action,
Right.
because we'll be waiting for everything to be right.
Amen.
So I think it's important to understand who I am and who I'm growing, because you got to know yourself to grow yourself. You went through the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth with me by John Maxwell. And you learned about, in order to grow yourself, you got to know yourself. That's that whole self-awareness piece that I spent my lifetime growing me into me rather than just growing to grow. Almost all of my degrees are centered around who I was growing and what I needed to grow into to serve at a different level, at a greater level. So I matched my training to who I am and who I needed to be now and next, which made it more meaningful while I was learning. So,
Absolutely.
but sometimes we need the tools and the mentors to do that. Being aware of how I'm wired and my leadership strengths, influence as a subject matter and as a practice comes natural for me, because it's my strongest area of leadership strength. I lead by influence in a very strong way. And I've been doing that with titles and without titles. Even when I worked for companies that the short time that I did not have a title, I still led by influence. To the point that I've never worked a job or been a part of anything, including in the faith realm. I have not been outside of a leadership role more than 6 months on the faith side or the business sector side,
Wow.
because
Wow.
of influence.
Awesome. Awesome. Well said. Well said. So we have about say 4 more minutes, and this is actually a great conversation. And we took a slight detour, but I felt like this was a great conversation that we've been having so far. But we're going to close this out, and I don't see any questions out there at this time. But we do plan to have another conversation this time next week as well. Same time, same day, next Thursday at 7 p.m. So we do plan on having that. But Bishop, before we go, is there any final remarks, final comments, any final thoughts that you would like to give the audience before we go?
I think the Deacon Halliburton, the biggest thing is to get plugged in somewhere where you can grow. And that's so critical to have a growth environment. And you don't grow uh, oranges in Cleveland. It's not the environment to grow oranges. Oranges can be grown, but they don't grow in every climate. So you got to be in a climate and an environment, no matter whether it's in your workplace, your community, wherever you plug in, it needs to be an environment where you can grow. And I think some of the things that we talked about and envisioned about the retreat being a launch pad for creating 1,000 men of influence and setting the stage for people to learn about how to be a man of influence. And then we talked about the curriculum and the tool of being fathered by God at a time that are so many that are fatherless, and for all kinds of reasons. That it's a fatherlessness time in our culture, in our society, and it gives you the ability to grow in age and stage. So you got to plug into an environment that gives you a journey track to run on as well, especially from a male perspective, because we have these pipeline the prisons, things within America that captures those that have not been fathered and mentored in significant ways and don't have access to them in many cases. So it's important to get plugged in, become self aware, and then value you enough to invest in growing you. It's going
Mm,
to be.
well said. Well said. And I appreciate you bringing up the retreat that we're having next week. So if this is again, Bishop Wilson will be our speaker, as I would say, preacher as well as facilitator during our Brotherhood retreat next week, May the 17th through the 19th at the Original Glorious Church in Columbus, Ohio. We are definitely excited about this retreat, and we want to invite you all to join us for that retreat. Now, we the retreat will be open Friday and Sunday to everybody, but on Saturday is going to be a men's only closed session at Deer Dustin in Plain City, and there is registration that's required for that. So this is going to be the time where we dive into a little bit more about what Bishop Wilson has been talking about, what we've been having conversations in terms of being a man of influence. We do need to have those registrations in. If you're able to attend, we need those as soon as possible so we know how many seats to set up. But it's not going to be just about food. The food is great here, but this is about how do we fellowship, how do we build unity among our men, but how do we also grow and develop that influence that we've been having this conversation about. And Bishop Wilson is a very capable speaker, and we just want to invite you to be a part of this retreat. It's something that we've been wanting to have. Also, if you want to be a part of our Facebook group, we do have a brotherhood Facebook group for our men's ministry. You can just search for Original Glorious Church Brotherhood, and then it should bring that up, or you can scan the QR code there as well. But also, Bishop Wilson will be talking a little bit more about a program as well, which we'll touch on. But if you, Bishop Wilson, did you want to touch on that a little bit?
Let's save that for next time, and then we'll have some different things that people can tap into, even going into the retreat. Because when we come back together, we'll be on the heels of the retreat and can go right into it. But we want you to be a part of that 1,000 men of influence, because it's your time and season to grow like you've always wanted to.
Hey man, this is the time, not just for the women of God, but this is a time for the men to rise up. And I believe we talk about, Joel said, the pouring out of the Spirit in the end times, and I believe we're in that season where God is going to raise up these men. And we're not just focusing men who are in the church. We want to invite men who are not in the church. This is not just for church people. This is for men of all ages. We're not limiting if they're churched or not. We want to just invite any men. If you have men in your families, if you have a son, an uncle, a nephew, if you got a neighbor, it doesn't matter. If they're a man, we know what a man is. There's a running question. They ask, "Do you know what a woman is?" We're not going to ask that here, but you should know what a man is, and we're not going to go into that because that will take us way in another direction. But we just want to invite as many men as possible. We are excited to have this. And again, Bishop Wilson, God bless you. I do appreciate you being a part of this retreat, and this conversation. I believe I've grown from this conversation. I've been stretched. Law of the rubber band from that. That's one of the laws from the. I have it right here.
Yes.
15 laws of growth. I got it right here. That's one of it. Being stretched, and and this that I feel like I've been stretched here, and I think we've grown together during this conversation. So thank God for you, and I appreciate you. And at this time, if there's nothing else, Bishop, did you have anything else?
No,
Any
no, just
announcements?
thanks for having me a part of this conversation with you. I'm so honored, and I'm looking forward to helping you grow to the next level. And let's take the nation and begin to spill over into the international arena.
Amen, amen. And I want to give a shout out to our my pastor, Bishop Dr. Bernita Wright. I love you. Thank you for allowing us to use this space, and she pushes our men. So I thank God for this opportunity. And without further ado, God bless you all, and have a good night. God bless.